Hey, Mark. Mark, do you have a thumb drive?
I have two.
Okay.
One is for the thing,
Uh-huh.
and one is the clicker.
I've got a clicker here.
Oh, that's cool.
Because this one works, even though.
Cool. Where do you want me to plug it in?
I'm going to have to take mine out, and I'll plug it in when I'm done.
Cool.
Dave, do you want me to do the, do you want me to say the thing about Catherine before?
Yeah, once you do that,
And then we'll do the voting?
yeah.
Okay.
Then you'll have my spiel.
Yep, okay. Sounds good. I don't know if they can hear me out there, but we are ready to start the meeting. Need to put a speaker out in the common area out there, so we're going to roust them. Yep. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm glad you all came out. And as you know, we are the Conradina Native Plant Society. And our mission is to promote the preservation, conservation, restoration of native plants and native plant communities of Florida. We serve the south part of the county. We go from roughly 520 all the way down to the county line. And as you know, we meet the second Monday of the month from September to May from 6 to 8. And we ask you to please silence your phone and try to keep conversations to a minimum. And there's no drink or food in the sanctuary. This is our last meeting for this year. The next one will be September 9th of 2024, starting our new season then. And everyone should know that we are going to have our annual landscaping with natives this October 26th. And it's basically going to be the northern part of our range, Vero, Sun Tree, and Linda, where else? Rockledge, thank you.
June is the last meeting, and it's the potluck at Urban Nation Park. I think we need to take advantage of it.
Yeah, okay, that's true. What is it? What day is that going to be? The 9th? June 9th. Yeah, it's on a Sunday at Erna Nixon Park. We'll have a board meeting there, and anyone that wants to show up.
No board meeting, it's just a meeting, just a potluck lunch.
Well, it's always been, okay. Anyway, we'll be meeting there. If anyone wants to come, you're welcome. And you can bring something It's basically going to be bring your own lunch, and if you wish to bring a treat or something like that, or something to drink, you can bring that. June 9th, we're going to meet at, I believe, 11. It should be in the newsletter, so we can check that. Okay, I'll be the outgoing president here just a couple weeks. And I want to thank all the board members for their support and their hard work during the year, and all the members that have come out and volunteered and helped with various plant sales and doing areas where we've done some restoration work, like Erna Nixon Park, Turkey Creek, Post Office, Martin Luther King Library, DeGroot. So we appreciate and thank you for all that. And I want to note that Catherine is going to be leaving the board, so I'd like her to stand up and give her a round of applause for all her hard work over the years. Thank you, Catherine. She'll still be around, but she's just not going to be a board member. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, where we're going to have our election for the new president, vice president, and board members.
Can you all hear me? Or do I need the mic? Well, this is the month we hold our annual voting. We used to have it in September, but to be more in line with the state chapters, we decided to move it to have our annual voting in May. And the new members will officially start on June 1st of this year, and it'll run till May 31st of next year. And I got my little cheat sheet here. And what we've done, because we moved the dates of the voting, we asked for an extension on some of the board members and the treasurer. So we will not be voting for these particular, they've already agreed to go ahead and extend their chapter. Jane Higgins is our treasurer. She has agreed to go ahead and extend it for a year till 2025. Martha Stewart, who is our chapter rep, she also has agreed to extend her position through 2025. And the following 3 board members have also agreed to extend their mission. That includes me, my wife, Karen Moser, and our fearless leader, Carol Hebert. Now, she was the nominating committee chairwoman, but she's out harassing birds in northern Ohio. Well, I don't know if she's harassing them, but I think she's at least observing them, so she wasn't able to be here. Now, who we are voting for the members is for president, that's Linda Garaci. Did you want to stand? For vice president, Sarah Morrison. There she is. For secretary, Terry LaPlante. There she is. She's accepted to do a second term as our secretary. And also a board member has agreed to do a second term is Annie Doshna. And we would like to invite 3 new board members. I believe Richard Blackford, I don't believe he was going to be here tonight. Christine Ryba, is she here? Not here. And Christine Bamberger, I know she's here. Now, those are who, whoever is a member can vote for these particular people. Now, before we do a request for a vote, we do want to ask, is there anybody that wants to nominate anybody for any of these positions? If not, then do I have a motion?
A motion would be in order to accept the slate as presented.
I make a motion to accept the slate as presented.
Thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Good, the ayes have it. The slate's been accepted then by the membership.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, we just got word this week that they have cut the staffing at Ernie Nixon Park to
You need all
zero.
this stuff. Yeah. There you go.
This is something the county commissioners did, and they were, I don't know what they were thinking. Please, go ahead.
May I comment on that? There wasn't a decision to cut the funding, but it's been an underfunded park for a long time. It did have a full-time ranger when Cheryl Caldwell quit in November. They replaced it with one full-time ranger, but that's still an asset for that park. And of course, she's there alone. And, sometimes that's very dangerous, which is why she now quit. So, and they don't have a replacement. Thank you. So they don't have a replacement, and they had a part-time intern who'd been really helpful, and he was let go a few weeks ago. So currently there are no permanent staff at the park. They do have a couple of people that come in and take care of the animals, but really that's it. So there's no maintenance being done, there's no watering being done except from the volunteers that I've organized. They're not maintaining the fire lines except when I've organized volunteers to do that. And so we're alarmed. Plants have been stolen from the park already, and ferns, actually strap ferns were taken. So, yeah.
This leaves the park basically
Thank
no
you.
one taking care of it. It's open to vandalism, and like, why they're doing this. Like I said, I don't think they really care. These are the commissioners. I've made a couple of printouts. If you guys want to do a screen grab on this, with your phone, I would highly recommend you email or phone or do both. I would like to see a group of us go to the next commission meeting and voice our objections to this. So we're going to work on it and see, what we can do. We'll probably send out a general email to everyone that's a member, so you'll know what's going on. Right now we're just, finding out about this, so it's going to take a little bit of time to, get our ducks in a row, so. Yes, go ahead.
They have that wonderful little room with all the animals and the taxidermy of some of the animals, and what's happening to that? Is it just locked all the time for protection?
It will be locked.
Yeah,
We assume that they will be sending people in to feed and water the animals, but that's, I believe that's it. Yeah.
and that could be spotty at best too. So, you know, and that leaves those animals, you know, in the lurch if no one's really taking any real care of them. And this is the board as it stands now. Obviously, it'll be a bit different come September. You'll see a different, some will remain, some will be moved around, and Catherine will no longer be there, but she'll be around. We'll still have a chance to harass her. Okay, tonight's speaker is Marc Spiess, and he is going to talk about invasive grasses in Florida. And let me give you a little background. He is the campus manager of the Environmental Learning Center in Vero Beach. He has a degree in philosophy from the University of Stuttgart in Germany. He had worked as a landscaper in habitat restoration before he moved his family to Florida. He manages 64 acres of diverse uplands and wetlands with over 200 species of plants. His talk is going to be about invasive species of grasses that pose as one of the greatest threats to biological diversity in Florida. So I'm going to let him come up here and give you his talk about this. So.
I'm just going to reiterate that I handed everybody our wish list for the landscape tour, and if you could... You need to go to the mic. Please, I'm sorry. I'm just going to reiterate that I handed everybody our wish list for the landscape tour, and if you could just contact Jane if you could help donate some plants. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Working on it.
You might want to put up a little higher on your collar there. Thank you.
Okay.
And
Cool. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
want the microphone?
Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be here. I wish I could see what I'm talking about. But okay. It'll be fine. Whoops. So, my topic is invasive grasses. That's usually a topic where half the people turn around and walk out the room. It's mostly not the most exciting topic. But I'll try to make it less dry. Why invasive grasses? So, I manage and maintain about 64 acres of coastal wetlands and uplands with more than 55 registered adult gopher tortoises. That alone can be quite a challenge. It is quite a challenge sometimes. But what makes it even more challenging is the invasive species. And there's specifically one type of invasive species that makes everything much more complicated. It is not the bushes and trees like Brazilian pepper or Australian pine and so forth. It is specifically the grasses in the understory and in the ground cover area. specifically the area that is most important for gopher tortoises, so the most vulnerable of all the species that suffer from invasion of invasive species like grasses. So, first of all, my presentation, why grasses? We're going to highlight a little bit more why specifically what makes an invasive species invasive. And we're going to talk a little bit about where do these species come from, because I think it is worth taking a closer look at where these species actually come from in order to better understand what makes a species invasive in Florida. Then we're going to talk about a little bit of examples. I have a whole bunch of photos for you, and conclusions and questions and answers. So, why grasses? There's specifically two reasons why grasses are important here. And there's a biological reason as well as a cultural reason. Grasses, and this is a generalization, so not all grasses fall in these categories, but most do. Grasses, in general, are successional plants. So if you lose a wooded landscape, the first thing that will show up is usually grasses, and I'm going to give you an example later. So there's successional plants that will create the new environment for succession of other stable states. Grasses generally have small seeds, which is favorable because grasses in general benefit from soil disturbance. Most grasses do need some kind of soil disturbance in order to root out, in order to reproduce. So these tiny seeds usually are able to fall into teeny tiny cracks of disturbed soil and then root out. Grasses in general have naturally high reproduction rates. So they produce large amount of seeds and fast growth rate, and they're not dependent. Grasses in general are not dependent on insect fertilization. For example, which is important in this year, this plant in the bottom is natal grass in Hawaii. Natal grass is now a highly invasive species on the Hawaiian Islands, specifically on new volcanic islands, new volcanic areas with nothing else but basalt. So stone, rocks, and barely any insects. That plant, because it is a grass, it is able to reproduce on barren islands, desert islands with barely any insects that would be able to pollinate any other plant. But for this presentation, it is almost more important, the cultural reasons. Grasses have always been extremely important for people as the most important food source. Let's say rice, wheat, corn, for example. And if you wonder, why do I have such a cheesy picture here for a Kentucky landscape on the right? Why do I have such a picture? This is the Kentucky bluegrass area. Kentucky bluegrass, just one example, is not a native species. Kentucky bluegrass was introduced by Europeans hundreds of years ago. Kentucky bluegrass, grows it's native to North Africa and Southern Europe, where it normally grows in higher mountain regions, which is extremely important and considered one of the most important food sources for sheep and goats. So it is an indirect food source, and the name poa, which it's Greek and translates into fodder, may give away why it was introduced to North America, and it is now an eponymous for an entire region in the United States. So grasses have always been important as a food source. In Florida specifically, there's one grass that stands out that has changed everything for northern Floridian native peoples. Not so much in the south. Corn, flint corn, was introduced in 750, so about 1,200 years ago from Mexico, where it is native, introduced by Mississippian cultures over the southern United States and eventually into northern Florida, where it has changed pretty much everything for the specifically Timucua cultures, multiple tribes, and has introduced a new cultural identity, a so-called, from an archaic type of culture that is characterized by hunting and gathering, to a nomadic way of life, to more agriculture, which has changed pretty much everything for them, including there's more complex social life and villages. Because what happens once you start producing more food than you can eat, somebody has to store that. You need administration, bureaucracy, and somebody has to be in charge. So it creates a more unequal social life. It makes everything complicated for me as well as a land manager. It has introduced species of grasses, have changed almost all Florida landscapes. And one of the most dramatic examples I can possibly think of, on the right we have a longleaf pine savanna. Longleaf pine savanna is one of the most biodiverse landscape in the world, and more than almost the entire biological diversity of longleaf pine savanna is in the understory and the ground covers. On the bottom here, all this white fluffy stuff is Kogan grass, considered one of the most invasive species in general in the world. On the left, we have the understory of a longleaf pine savanna in a mesic area where what it's supposed to look like, highly diverse. So on the right, we have a longleaf pine savanna that is completely void of any biological diversity. There is longleaf pines and nothing else in the understory except maybe there's some, looks like a grapevine, but nothing else. So where do these grasses come from? About of 200 exotic species that are now in Florida, a little more, 200 exotic species, only 18 are officially listed as invasive species, officially listed. Of course, there are more. The reason why it's not more is because it takes a long time for these plants to get on the list in these councils. But it's at least 18 species that are officially listed as invasive. Almost all of them originate from Africa. Why? Why specifically Africa? I think by taking a closer look at where these plants come from, we can gain a better understanding of what makes an invasive species so invasive. So when first Europeans arrived in Florida and in the southern United States, one of the first landscapes they saw was a landscape that resembled a little bit like this. Pine savannas with a diverse grassy understory. And these Europeans that arrived here, most of them were still farmers. They brought all their animals with them, sheep, goat, pigs, unfortunately, that they released later, and specifically cows. Cows. And we know there are quite a few species of grasses in the understory here that are actually nutritious and edible for cows. Like, for example, one of my favorite plants, I have a lot of favorite plants, but one of them here on the left, Avastida spiciformis, or bottlebush 3-on, one beautiful grass, was originally promoted by early farmers in the United States, European farmers, as a very nutritious plant. They tried to grow it, didn't work. I have tried to grow this plant so many times, it never worked. My assumption is it needs mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria that are common in soil and scrub and pine flatwoods that just die in pots. So it is nearly impossible, for me at least, to grow this plant, unfortunately. Another beautiful plant, Sorghastrum secundum, lopsided Indian grass, I shouldn't be able to say that, lopsided Indian grass, beautiful plant, nutritious, and cows eat it, but some of the most important native grasses that are edible and nutritious for cows are in the Andropogon genus. Specifically in scrub and pine flatwoods, longleaf pine savanna, we have Andropogon virginicus, I don't remember the common name. I think it has to do with silver underpogon. And underpogon cumicola, here on the right side, a little greener next to the silvergrass, is one of the few endemic species in the underpogon genus. They almost always occur in the scrub and in pine flatwoods. Beautiful grass. But there's one big problem with these grasses. They're not able to handle soil disturbance very well. Almost all grasses need some kind of soil disturbance. These grasses die or they disappear quickly with an intense agriculture, which may be the reason why we today have landscapes like this one here, wiregrass dominated, longleaf pine savanna and pine flatwoods. We know cows do not eat wiregrass. To me, it is a miracle how this grass actually survives. It is one of my favorite grasses. It's almost always brown, unless it was just recently burned. Not very deep root system, and it survives pretty much everything, but cows don't eat it. Everything else was palatable and nutritious. So what was left, probably, is just wiregrass. And we know specifically this here, what used to be a historic cow forage or cow pasture. Which is why we have landscapes like these here now. So-called improved cow pastures. Then farmers came up with the idea to introduce grasses. They're better at handling intense foraging, intense farming, so to speak. Improved, of course, from the perspective of a farmer, not from an ecological perspective. There is a difference between improved and semi-improved. Semi-improved pasture still contains some native species. Improved pasture is completely introduced species, almost always forage grasses from Africa. But why is that? There's one big reason. Large animals, megafauna, megaherbivores, have been absent in Florida for at least 10,000 years, since the end of the Pleistocene epoch. That is when climates became cooler, ocean levels went up, interior lakes and rivers and streams developed, and most megafauna went extinct. Unlike in Africa. African megafauna is still an extremely important factor in most of African landscapes, like elephants, wildebeest, zebras, and so forth, especially savanna elephants. We know savanna elephants are extremely good at maintaining grassland, because what they do in Africa, is they trample, which African grasses love. They eat, unlike cows, they eat tree seedlings and saplings. So they're extremely good at maintaining grassland. So, two big factors. It's fire and animals that make the big difference. On the right, we have a landscape in Africa that was just recently burned. On the left is Sebastian River State Park. So, fire. Almost all of the invasive species of grasses in Florida are so-called C4 grasses. I'm not going to go too much into detail. I don't want you to fall asleep, but C4 grasses, this is important, have a special adaptation, a metabolic adaptation to drier environments. And almost all of them, almost all C4 grasses in the world evolved during the Miocene epoch about 20 million years ago, and this is very important. Why is that? 20 million years ago is when the climates became cooler. Almost all the tropical forests disappeared, and grasslands evolved. And like I said in the beginning, once you lose trees, a forest, one of the first things that shows up is grassland. And unless it is maintained, by animals or fire, it will change, it will succeed to another stable state, like xeric hammock in this case. But in this case, in the world, we had fire and animals still, all over the place. Glyptodons and mastodons, all sorts of animals until the Pleistocene epoch ended. In Florida, almost all of these animals disappeared. In Africa, they still exist. And please stay with me, this is much less complicated than it looks like. So, which creates a positive feedback loop. So with a drier climate of the Miocene epoch, for example, forests disappear and grasslands develop. If you have fire, and C4 grasses are highly flammable, if you have fire, it'll create a drier climate again and more grassland. And in Africa, you have another big factor, the big advantage that African grasses have compared to Florida grasses. They have the evolutional pressure of mega herbivores that tilt and graze, and these plants, these grasses from Africa are better adapted to soil disturbance. And I'm going to give you a few examples. So Kogan grass, like I said, is considered one of the most invasive species in general, all over the world. Native to Africa and Asia as well. Was introduced in 1918 as packaging material. Unfortunately, it also came with seeds, spread all over the place, and later it was also introduced as a forage grass for cows. The problem with that is cows don't eat it. It is not edible for any kind of animal. There is no known animal in Florida that is able to use Kogan grass in any way. This is a leaf blade of a Kogan grass blade. If you walk through a field of Kogan grass, like this here, this is in Sebastian, it'll rip you up, and it's almost like sawgrass. And the leaves contain silica crystals, tiny crystals, and they'll tear your guts up. So it's not used by pretty much anything. Luckily, it is really easy to identify this grass. It is the only grass that I know of that always has an off-center midrib. And But what's for us a plague is in other countries like in Africa or in Asia, a blessing. On the left side, we have a typical thatching roof that is almost all Indonesian and Central African traditional houses have Kogan grass thatching. This is on the left side, and on the right we have an Indonesian house. Typical thatching in Indonesia, and there's companies now. I'm not an influencer, I'm not going to do advertisement, but they're called EcoSmart. What they do is, they created a plastic alternative to Kogan grass. The bottom picture is the plastic alternative to Kogan grass thatching that resembles Kogan grass. I guess that's the carousel of progress. You replace an organic, local source and then replace it with plastic. Known as alang-alang in Indonesia. So if you see a plant, a grass that just pops out without any stem or anything else, you're probably looking at Kogan grass. On the right-hand side, we have the typical bottle brush seeds. If you see this plant, try to rip it out. Unfortunately, it is almost always too late once you see it. Fire does not take care of this plant. It loves fire. There's two things this plant likes. It's extreme soil disturbance. You can till it, you can try to rip it out. It'll always grow back. If you have a teeny tiny piece of root in the soil, it'll come back. Fire, it loves. The problem with that is for land managers, and specifically in North America, is it creates an intense heat. More than 80% of Florida ecosystems are fire dependent. which means they need these ecosystems need fire in order to exist. They would disappear. Many of our endangered and threatened species in Florida are not threatened and endangered because the species itself is. It's because their habitat, their ecosystem is almost entirely lost. Like longleaf pine savanna, for example. So almost all Florida ecosystems are more or less dependent on fire, but it is important to understand these species are not dependent on fire per se. They are dependent and have adapted to a fire regime. A very specific heat, a very specific intensity, and very specific time since fire. Otherwise, they would fail to reproduce and would disappear. With this kind of fire, it is way too intense for anything else. A Kogan grass fire kills pretty much everything, including longleaf pines, one of the most fire-resistant plants in Florida. Another problem is with Kogan grass infestations, it highly increases the biomass. And specifically with grass biomass, we have studies that show at a certain point, a pivot point, once you have an increase, once your biomass of grasses increases, you ultimately lose biological diversity in general. And here we have a fire-maintained landscape. You can still see in yellow the patches that had recently burned, and in white a patch that is still on fire. Everything else burned down. Kogan grass fires keep burning, and with an extreme heat. On the right, this is in Africa, on an African market. Kogan grass roots are also used for tea. So it is nearly impossible to remove Kogan grass just by hand. The reason is, like I said, teeny tiny pieces of the roots will root out, and there's almost always a seed bank if it produces viable seeds, which has recently been found that Kogan grass actually reproduces, has genetic diversity now with seeds, which was unknown until recently. Glyphosate takes care of it. The problem with that is glyphosate only attacks the green plant material. So you have to spray it on the green plant material. Everything else underneath, under the ground, will stay viable. So you have to apply it multiple times over multiple years. Imazipyr is much more aggressive. That kills pretty much everything underground except for Kogan grass. It'll come back. Probably, you have to apply it probably twice. Either way, especially with the Imazipyr, I have a friend that used to manage over 100 acres, and he had a Kogan grass infestation. After 2 years after he applied Imazipyr, it was still a barren landscape. So it will stay in the soil for a long time, at least for half a year, probably for much longer. Another example, Guinea grass, one of my favorites on the landscape that I manage. There's almost always a seed bank somewhere. Introduced in the 1800s as cow forage grass, like almost all of them. Especially grows in disturbed soil, and one of the most shade-tolerant invasive species. It loves shade. It grows nearly everywhere where there's soil disturbance in central Florida now. It creeps up north with increasing temperatures and climate change. It is not that easy to identify it, but once you get a little bit of practice, once you have a little bit of practice, it is relatively easy. A very pronounced midrib, hairy liggles, and hairy nodes. And unlike paraggrass, which is very similar, it is more open, more dense, and it's much smaller panicle and much smaller seeds. Paraggrass, on the other hand, has much larger seeds, more open panicle, and Johnson grass as well. On the right-hand side, we have Johnson grass with much darker leaves, Fortunately though, Johnson grass is not that common here in central Florida. If you go further north, it is pretty much everywhere. In fact, as a farmer up north and in central Florida, if you talk about Guinea grass, farmers usually don't know what you're talking about. If you mention Johnson grass, it's oh, okay. For them, everything that looks like Johnson grass is, even if it's Guinea grass, is all called Johnson grass. So, this is on the property, the 64 acres that I manage. The problem with Guinea grass is it almost always pops up where there's a gopher tortoise. Like I said, there aren't really many animals in Florida anymore, native species of animal that create soil disturbance. Gopher tortoises are an exception. Gopher tortoises, they dig underground and almost always create some kind of an apron around the burrows, which Guinea grass loves, and especially in the shade. So if you're in the scrub, for example, low landscape with maybe 6-foot high bushes, and you see a tall Guinea grass in the middle of nowhere, that's an indicator that there's probably a gopher tortoise burrow. And the problem with Guinea grass around gopher tortoise burrows is it grows extremely dense and makes habitat, and this basically destroys habitat for gopher tortoises because they can't walk through this dense grass anymore. So you have to pull it out. Pulling out is not always an option. Sometimes you have to apply herbicides. Pigs, for example, another invasive species that was introduced by Europeans, creates soil disturbance. Invasive species like pigs, they get invasive species. There's not, in this landscape, the Sebastian River State Park, when these pigs show up, there's no native species anymore. All you see is Kogan grass, Johnson grass, Guinea grass, Pará grass, and nothing else. Because native species of grasses usually are unable to handle that amount of tillage. How do we control Guinea grass? Luckily, it's very easy to pull up. The problem with that is it almost always has a seed bank somewhere. So once you dig a plant up, a grass, you will disturb the soil, and there's going to be some seeds in the soil that will just wait to be pulled up. So sometimes if you have a larger infestation of Guinea grass, there's no other way. On multiple acres, you can't just pull them all up and disturb all the soil, make the problem even worse. Sometimes glyphosate is inevitable. Luckily, we have biological control now. There's testings that have shown there are native species of fungi. If you concentrate them and spray them on the plants, it'll control them. Here on the bottom right side, we have a Guinea grass that was nearly killed by it. Nearly killed. It usually comes back from the roots, but if you apply it multiple times, it'll kill it eventually. Pará grass, you will see in almost every canal in central Florida. There's almost guaranteed there's a little bit of Pará grass somewhere in central Florida, especially near historic cow pastures. These Pará grass seeds, they float, they drift in canals, in rivers, and streams, and will brought somewhere else and pop up somewhere else. It was introduced in the 1870s as a cow forage grass. It is palatable, it is nutritious for cows, and works great on cow pastures. Identification is not that easy. Like I said, it is easy to confuse it with Guinea grass. The good thing is, it doesn't matter if you kill Guinea grass or Pará grass, just pull it out. The nodes are a little bit more hairy than Guinea grass. The leaf sheaths are a little bit more hairy. The big difference is Pará grass will grow has really long stems and will eventually flop over and root out from the nodes, like in this case. So this is one of the biggest infestations of Pará grass I've ever seen. It is along the St. Lucie River, a canal that leads into the St. Lucie River. Multiple miles of nothing but Pará grass. and it loves soil disturbance. This is a mound, a fill mound on a new development in Sebastian. It's called the Lost Tree Preserve. They filled this, they used this mound for land filling for a new house. This landscape will always have paraggrass in it. Torpedo grass is another one. Introduced as a forage grass in the 1870s, especially around brackish waters and fresh waters, wherever there's a little bit of moisture, it'll show up. I'm sure almost every lawn in Florida, Central Florida and South Florida, has a little bit of torpedo grass in it now. It is not always easy to identify it, but there's a relatively easy way. There's 3 species of grasses that can easily get confused with it. Seashore paspalum, if you're in a coastal environment, if the grass you're looking at has a stolon, which means an above ground runner, it is not torpedo grass, like this, the picture on the left. On the right-hand side, in the coastal environment, if the grass has white tufts as the seeds, you're not looking at torpedo grass. Torpedo grass always has a more open panicle. And on the bottom right picture, if the leaves have salt on them, then it's not torpedo grass, then it's salt grass. Salt grass, like black mangroves, have salt glands on the leaves and they will excrete the salt in the soil. If you're in a freshwater environment and the leaves do not have a tip, like on the left-hand side, you're looking at maiden cane, which is a native grass. How do we control it? Cardboarding, like laying out cardboard, don't even try it. It's a waste of time. Landscape cloth just pollutes your soil with microplastics. Vinegar just makes your yard smell like a French salad. Doesn't do anything else. Fire is completely ineffective. You can burn it intensely. It'll always come back, and that is due to these roots. I call them the potatoes. They contain a lot of carbohydrate, so sugar, and every time it is eaten by an animal or burned, it'll always come back. So the only thing that works in larger infestations is glyphosate and imazapyr. If you have a smaller infestation, if you catch it early, you can pull it up, but you have to make sure you get every single tiny piece. If you leave a tiny piece in the soil, it will come back. And if you go on vacation and you come back, it's going to be everywhere. Elephant grass. This is along the Sebastian River. Elephant grass was introduced in 1913 as a cow forage grass. Pretty much everywhere now where it's moist and damp, especially near historic cow pastures. It is relatively easy to identify elephant grass. If you look at a plant that has a stem that is thicker than your thumb, unless you're a carpenter, that is thicker than your thumb, you're looking at elephant grass. It has a pronounced orange-yellow inflorescence. And nowadays the leaves, now we know there is a pathogen that is relatively new now in Florida, came over from Africa, that attacks, creates leaf spottings, luckily, on elephant grass. So that is another indicator you're looking at elephant grass. It grows really, really tall. 10 foot is not unheard of. 12 foot sometimes. It has aerial roots sometimes. So just like red mangroves, for example, they have aerial roots. They root out to stabilize the plant. Due to its height, it will sometimes produce aerial roots that stabilize the plant. And once it falls over, it doesn't mind. It will root out from the nodes. How do we control it? Pulling it out sometimes works. In this case, this is a negative example. This is Anson and Sebastian, the conservation area along the Sebastian River, separate from the Sebastian River State Park, but connected, pretty much the same. A negative example because all the plants that were killed with probably glyphosate along this path were actually native. Everything else in the background is invasive. So the city of Sebastian and the county, unfortunately, they keep making the same mistakes. I don't want to call anybody out because I'm not a jerk, but the way this example is managed is pretty awful. They sprayed pretty much the entire path, all the paths with probably glyphosate, but there's multiple acres. It goes on for miles and miles in the background. It's just a teeny tiny aspect here. It goes on just elephant grass and nothing else. And they left that alone. But everything else in the front, that was all under pogon grasses. A weedy native, but there's no reason to kill it with herbicides. Natal grass, an example from the beginning. One of the most drought-tolerant invasive grasses I know. It'll pop up on the driest, barren landscapes. There is the Lost Tree Preserve that I just mentioned. It is a new development, not finished yet, in a former sandpine scrub. Deep clay and sand. Deep clayey sand. Nothing grows on it. They cleared the land 2 years ago, probably. I think it was 2 years ago. There's still nothing on it. Nothing grows in that sand for years, except natal grass. Introduced as a cow forage grass, grows typically in African savannas. Some people think this is beautiful. It's beautiful if you want your place to look like an African savanna. It has white to purple, pink inflorescences. It actually looks quite pretty in the light. And it loves soil disturbance. There's a few human cost factors that natal grass benefits from. For example, fire breaks. Here on the left, this is Sebastian North County scrub. Beautiful scrub, where he unfortunately went in with bulldozers and mowed it, basically. The problem with that is it'll always have natal grass from now on. It is not always easy to identify natal grass. If you're looking at a grass, the easy way to identify it, if you're looking at a grass that has pink, purple, and open inflorescence, you're probably 90% sure you're looking at natal grass. Very, very shallow root systems, very thick, nothing fibers on it, very thick roots. So what is the takeaway? The invasive species don't always originate from places. In most cases, especially in Africa, invasive species originate from a certain mindset that has to improve certain areas. And where native vegetation has to be replaced with new vegetation from other places. Thank you. Any questions?
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
From a practical sense, when you showed the paragraphs, for example, I'm curious if anything really lives in there in the form of what I'm going to say, mammals, reptiles, or birds.
So paragraphs.
Or these wastelands, in
Yeah.
effect.
So paragraphs landscapes that are dominated by paragraphs is pretty much biologically dead. There's nothing else. If you look at the understory, between paragraphs, everything else is underneath, is shaded out. Nothing else grows in it, except maybe here and there you have a little bit of cogon grass in the background, but usually there's nothing else. So plant maybe as a shelter for marsh bunnies, but that's pretty much it. It is not a pollinator plant because grasses are not pollinated by insects, and animals don't eat it except for cows. Deer usually eats paragrass.
Okay, because and the other thing is I want to use layman's terms. Do most of these basically crowd out the competition of beneficial plants with their root structure. You said that.
They outcompete everything else. Native vegetation.
As opposed to, and I'm going to contrast it, where I come from up north, if you got a black walnut tree, don't try to grow anything nearby it, anything in the way of a garden, because it puts out poison. These plants on their own don't put out a poison, do they?
No. There are other grasses that do. Guinea grass is sometimes said it produces some kind of chemicals that outcompete other vegetation. It has not been proved yet. It's just an assumption. But the only grass I know of that does that is maybe is Guinea grass. That's the only one I know.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, what about goats? Goats seem to eat everything. They won't touch anything fresh.
Yeah. Goats, deer, for example, they will eat it. But the thing is only when it's young. Like Guinea grass, for example, cows won't eat it. Sometimes you see vast cow pastures and these big clumps of grasses in between. And everything else is low. It's because cows don't eat Guinea grass once it reaches 2 feet. It becomes unpalatable and not nutritious enough. And then it grows 6 feet tall, and then it's too late and you have to rip it out or mow it. But cows will eat it. Cows and goats. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The two poisons that were mentioned, the Roundup and...
Imazapyr?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you apply them and then later handle those grasses, will that hurt your skin, or do those poisons hurt other plants in the ground?
You have to know what you're doing. Do not touch the plants. Do not touch anything that was recently treated with herbicides. I'm not an expert. I'm a land manager, but I'm not an expert on herbicides. But I can tell you, I always tell my team, do not, when something is treated with herbicides, do not touch it anymore. Stay away for maybe a week until everything is absorbed or washed away. Yeah. Yeah, smut grass. Right, smut grass is pretty much just like natal grass. For those who don't know, smut grass, it looks just like natal grass, except it does not have the purple, pink inflorescence, sometimes white. Smut grass has a black inflorescence. It's called smut grass because the inflorescence is almost always covered in the fungi that makes it look black, or like soot, basically. Smut grass will always show up where there's some kind of soil disturbance. It is relatively easy to pull out, but you have to keep an eye on it. If you just have a small yard and you have smut grass here and there, it is easy to manage. You can just pull it up. But if you have a larger infestation of smut grass and other invasive species, sometimes there's no other way. Luckily, the thing with smut grass is it almost never produces or creates large patches. So smut grass is usually not a big problem. There's usually not a reason to treat it with herbicides. But if it grows among other invasive species, then I would just, and if it's a larger infestation, then it's sometimes better to just treat it with some kind of herbicide for the future, for restoration.
Do you need a license to use an Invasive?
On private land, you don't. On public land, you do. Yeah.
Any suggestions for our own little habitats?
Say that again.
Any suggestions on what we should do, like in our own little habitats, as far as?
In your yard, basically?
Yeah, in your
Yeah.
yard. I mean, is it helpful?
Maintain your landscape as a native landscape. Try to eradicate them wherever you see the invasives. Sometimes it's not a big deal. Sometimes you just can't get rid of them. But do your best.
So would you suggest if you pull these invasives, they go in your regular garbage and not in your green recycle waste?
Sometimes if you throw them in the garbage, they will end up on the landfill and root out there. Unfortunately, I have to go to the Indian River County landfill quite often to bring garbage away. Up the trash mountain, it looks like a Mad Max landscape. I mean, it's awful. And the only grass is that it is covered in invasive species.
I'm just thinking they probably don't compost that hot enough to kill
Yeah,
invasives. That was my thought.
I wouldn't compost them.
Huh?
I wouldn't compost. If you have an invasive grass, don't throw it on a compost.
So that also means that you probably don't put it out in the yard waste barrels that the city picks up.
Yeah, you can. Then it will root out somewhere else. So, what I usually do, I throw them, my invasive, when we pull them up, I throw them in big black bins and leave them out in the sun for a couple weeks. If it's in my personal yard, this is just my private me, I put them in bins and leave them in the hot west-facing garage for a couple weeks until they're completely dead, and then throw them in the garbage or on a compost.
What is your outlook as far as the future of these grasses?
That's a very good question. Most of these grasses over the years have spread quite a bit. I travel up north to the Savannah area almost every year. Every time I go up there, I see guinea grass further north. So unfortunately, it looks relatively bleak, especially with all the new development and soil disturbance all over the place. But it takes a responsible citizenship, basically. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, you have to speak. I'm a carpenter too, so I hear.
We could take these invasive grasses and let them dry out and then burn them and make biochar.
You can burn them, of course, yeah.
That would actually be beneficial for your
Yeah. You could burn them, of course. That's a good idea. Just keep in mind they'll produce a lot of. Go all over the places, but don't burn them during a drought. Anything else? That's it. Thank you so much.